War is remembered through the thunder of tanks, the roar of aircraft, and the clash of armies across ruined fields. But behind every explosion, behind every advance, there is another battlefield. A quieter one. A hidden one. A battlefield of illusion. Throughout history, generals have used deception as a silent weapon. Fake retreats, false banners, staged campfires designed to mislead scouts watching from the hills. But in World War II, deception became something far more sophisticated. Not just trickery. Not just misdirection. But a science. A weapon that could reshape entire battlefields without firing a single shot. This story is one of the most extraordinary examples. It does not begin with an army. It does not begin with a battalion, or a regiment, or even a company. It begins with just 6 men. 6 men chosen not for strength, but for imagination. Not for brute force, but for their ability to make the enemy see what was never there. Their mission was nearly impossible. Convince an entire German division that thousands of Allied soldiers were preparing to attack, when in reality, there were only 6. It was a mission built on shadows, on fake footprints, inflatable tanks, artificial radio chatter, and the courage to stand only a few miles from the enemy, with nothing but illusions to protect them. If the deception succeeded, the Allies would gain a critical advantage, saving thousands of lives. If it failed, the Germans would discover the truth, and these 6 men would be executed as spies. No questions. No mercy. For decades, this operation remained buried in classified files. Names erased. Reports locked away. The world never knew what these 6 men accomplished. But now, their story can finally be told. This is not a tale of overwhelming firepower. This is not the story of tanks charging forward, or infantry storming enemy positions. This is the story of a different kind of courage. A different kind of warfare. The courage to fight with imagination. The courage to fight with silence. The courage to deceive an entire army. This is the story of the 6 men who fooled a German division and changed the fate of a battlefield. They were not the kind of men anyone expected to change a battlefield. Not commandos. Not elite snipers. Not heroes carved from the steel of frontline combat. They were strangers brought together because each possessed a talent that didn't belong in an ordinary war, but was perfect for this one. There was Corporal James Harlow, an artist from Chicago. Before the war, he built theater stages and illusions for live performances. He could take wood, canvas, rope, and turn them into something that looked real, even up close. To him, a tank wasn't a machine. It was a shape, a silhouette, a trick of light and shadow. And war needed shadows. Then there was Lieutenant Samuel Briggs, a radio genius who rarely spoke, but communicated more through frequencies than most men did with entire conversations. Briggs could mimic officers, infantry chatter, logistics teams, even artillery spotters. All from one transmitter. All in real time. German radio interceptors would hear battalions moving, companies repositioning, armored divisions preparing to attack. But it was all Briggs. One man. One voice. One illusion. Next was Sergeant Leon Keller, a sound engineer from New York. Before the war, he built sound effects For movies and jazz halls. During the war, he created battlefield audio so real that enemy scouts often reported armor that didn't exist. He carried reels of sound. Heavy tank tracks. Half-track engines. Troops marching. Artillery rolling over dirt roads. Played through hidden speakers. That turned forest shadows into an approaching army. And then there were O'Malley and Ruiz. Intelligence men. Fluent in German. Masters of disguise. Able to slip into local villages. And listen quietly from bar counters. Or plant false documents. Where German scouts would discover them. They were the actors of the team. Their stage. Enemy territory. Their lines. Whatever the Germans needed to hear. To believe the illusion. And lastly. Jonah Pike. The saboteur. A man who could place charges. With such precision. That engineers studying the wreckage struggled to believe. A single person was responsible. Pike said little. But when he spoke, everyone listened. He specialized in controlled chaos. Explosions not meant to kill, but to suggest movement. Panic. Or the arrival of forces that weren't really there. 6 men. Each one unique. Each one strange in their own way. But together, they formed a weapon. Deadlier than any rifle. A weapon made of fear. Deception. Illusion. A weapon that could turn whispers into armies. And soon, they would use that weapon on an entire German division. To understand the scale of what these 6 men faced, you must understand the army standing before them. The 352nd German Infantry Division. 12,000 soldiers. Battle-tested. Battle-scarred. And commanded by officers who had survived both the Eastern Front and the relentless Allied push across Europe. These were not young recruits. These were hardened veterans. Men who had fought in frozen trenches against Soviet armor. Men who had survived city fights where every doorway hid a rifle. Men who saw deception not as surprise, but as expectation. They were trained to see through illusions. They were conditioned to distrust anything that didn't smell like truth. Their division was spread across bunkers, trenches, artillery positions, and reinforced defensive lines that stretched across hills and forests. Machine gun nests watched every valley. Observation posts scanned the night with binoculars and searchlights. Their radios never rested. Their scouts never slept. Their officers never underestimated the possibility of Allied trickery. To fool them was madness. But the Allies didn't need to defeat the division. They just needed to move it a few miles north. Just enough for a corridor to open. A narrow gap that Allied forces could charge through. Before the Germans realized they'd been manipulated. Move a regiment. Move a battalion. Move a division headquarters. Any of these would be a victory. But moving the entire division, 12,000 men, was the dream. An impossible dream. And yet, that was the mission. 6 men standing against the perceptions of 12,000. They didn't need bullets to win this battle. They needed belief. They needed German officers to interpret sounds, signals, shadows as overwhelming force. They needed the enemy to convince themselves. Because in the art of deception, the most powerful illusion is the one the enemy creates in their own mind. And in the days ahead, the Germans would see an entire Allied assault forming, even though not a single soldier was really there. The briefing took place inside a dim command tent, lit only by a single lantern, swaying gently from a rope overhead. Maps, hand-drawn sketches, radio intercept transcripts covered every inch of canvas wall. The air felt heavy, silent, as if the war itself held its breath. Colonel Whitford stood at the center of the room. A man with a face carved by years of command decisions. The kind that saved thousands or condemned them. He didn't waste time. He pointed to a red ink circle on the map. "This," he said quietly, "is where the Germans expect us to attack." He dragged his finger north. "This is where we need them to reinforce." A pause. A silent moment, where 6 pairs of eyes followed his finger and understood instantly what was being asked. "You are going to create an army," Whitford said. "Not with men. Not with tanks. But with perception." He laid out the tools on a wooden table. Inflatable tanks. Fake radio logs. Audio reels of engines and treads. German-style boot prints. Forged documents. And a radio transmitter, powerful enough to echo across the valley like a real battalion. The colonel's voice steady. "You will have no reinforcements. No backup. No artillery. If the enemy discovers you, you will be treated as spies." He let the words sink in. Success means thousands of Allied lives saved. Failure means none of you come home. Still, no one stepped back. Not Keller. Not Briggs. Not Pike. O'Malley grinned. "Sir, when do we start painting our fake tanks?" Even the colonel couldn't help a small smile. That smile was the last moment of lightness before the shadow of the mission fell over them completely. Because from this point forward, every sound they made, every footprint they left, every whisper they created, would be watched by the enemy. And in the next scene, they enter the darkness. For real. Night fell like a curtain. Thick, heavy, silent. The kind of darkness that swallows sound and hides every shape that dares to move through it. The 6 men advanced slowly. Heads low. Breath controlled. Packs filled not with weapons, but with illusions. Canvas frames. Air pumps. Audio cables. Pre-recorded engines. False boot tracks. And a portable radio system, powerful enough to sound like a small army. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to disappear. Trees muffled their steps. Branches brushed their shoulders. Only the faint glow of moonlight guided their way. Then they reached the line intelligence officers called the Shadow Zone. A narrow band just outside German patrol routes. Invisible on maps. Deadly in reality. One wrong step. One cough. One slip of sound. And a German patrol would descend on them instantly. Briggs whispered. "We're in their breath now." Harlow nodded. He could almost feel the German searchlights moving across the ridgeline ahead. Keller dropped to one knee, listening. Engines. Metal clanking. Boots. German voices drifting over the valley. Like ghosts. They were close. Too close. But this was where the illusion had to begin. The team set to work. With a silent precision that looked almost rehearsed. Harlow assembled the first inflatable tank. Its canvas skin rustling softly as it rose into shape. A shadow becoming steel. Under moonlight. Briggs planted his radio antennas beneath leaves and brush. Adjusting coils. Testing frequencies. Until the static cleared. And the valley filled with the whisper of fake battalions. Keller buried speakers under the roots of an old oak tree. Then tested a low rumble. The sound of engines far away. Perfect. O'Malley and Ruiz walked in wide arcs, leaving trails of forged footprints. Boot patterns copied from real Allied regiments. Nowhere near this location. And Pike, silent as always, placed small charges that would later simulate the tremors of heavy armor. Moving at night. By the time dawn crept in, like a thin pale line on the horizon, the ridge behind them no longer looked like a forest. It looked like the staging ground of an Allied battalion. 6 men. A valley full of shadows. And the beginning of a deception that would consume an entire German division. Just before sunrise, German observers in a bunker overlooking the valley noticed something unusual. A faint rumble. Low, distant. Like engines moving through fog. The observer pressed his ear to the frozen metal slit. There it was again. A rolling vibration. Echoing across the hills. He reached for binoculars. At first, nothing. Just trees. Mist. The gray wash of morning light. Then. A shape. A dark outline. Parked beneath the ridge. He squinted. It looked like a tank. Another faint vibration drifted through the cold air. More engines. He called his superior. Within minutes, 2 officers appeared beside him. One raised binoculars. The other listened. The officer frowned. It's too early. The Americans don't move armor before first light. The observer nodded. Maybe they're preparing a dawn assault. The officer hesitated. But only for a moment. Log it, he ordered. And increase patrols. Down in the forest. The 6-man team worked quietly. Briggs adjusted the transmitter. Injecting snippets of fake radio chatter. Alpha convoy moving into position. Bring up the second wave. Artillery will be in range by daybreak. Each line delivered. In different tones. Different voices. Different levels of static. To make it sound like dozens of men speaking across real channels. Keller switched the soundscape to a slow, steady clatter. Half tracks. Moving over dirt roads. Even at low volume. It carried for miles. Ruiz smirked. If I were German, he whispered, I'd be writing letters home already. As the sun rose, the illusion strengthened. Not because it was flawless, but because German officers were already looking for patterns that confirmed their fears. And illusions are strongest when the enemy wants to believe them. By midday, the German division had begun to show the first Signs of concern. A scout team was dispatched to investigate the ridge. 6 men watched from deep shadow as 3 German soldiers moved cautiously across the forest. They paused, listened, touched the ground. One kneeled over Harlow's forged tracks. He pressed his fingers into the soil, feeling the depth, the spacing. He stood. Infantry passed here. At least a platoon. Ruiz whispered. He bought it. The Germans advanced again. And spotted the inflatable tank. But from a distance. Through trees. Half obscured by shadow. It looked real. The scout leader raised binoculars. Held them steady. His breath visible in the cold. Panzer? One soldier asked. American armor. The scout whispered. M4 Shermans. At least 2. 2. It was only one decoy. But fear adds ghosts to every shadow. The scout leader scribbled notes and ordered a retreat. He never realized the tank was made of fabric and filled with air. He never realized the engine sounds weren't engines at all. He never suspected that the radio chatter his signals unit intercepted was coming from a transmitter so small that Briggs carried it in a backpack. He never imagined that 6 men were rewriting the battlefield around him. The report was delivered to the German command post. By early afternoon, enemy armor spotted. North Ridge. Infantry movement detected. Possible assault formation. The division commander. Read it twice. Then a third time. He muttered. Why here? Why now? Because of 6 men. Who understood that fear spreads faster than truth. Night returned. And with it, the chance to escalate. The illusion. The 6 men worked through moonless darkness. Hands stiff from cold. Faces hidden by branches. Voices kept to soft whispers. Harlow inflated. For more tank decoys. Their canvas skins glistening slightly. As moonlight caught the curved edges. Placed on the ridge. At staggered angles. They formed the silhouette of an armored company. Then Keller unspooled new audio lines. Adding the metallic grind of tank turrets rotating. The clank of treads. The occasional hiss of brake releases. He layered the sounds with subtle imperfections. Echo. Distance. The way noise bounces between hills. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to match what German soldiers expected to hear. In the dark, Briggs shifted frequencies. He created a network of fake platoons, each one talking to another in carefully timed bursts. Alpha Position 1, reporting ready. Convoy Bravo moving. Artillery unit confirming grid. Ruiz planted. Lost Allied rations. Near a common patrol path. A deliberate breadcrumb. For any German soldiers. Searching for evidence. And Pike. Pike added. Something special. Controlled explosives. Buried deep. Beneath loose soil. Not enough to harm anyone. But enough to shake the ground. Like armored vehicles. Moving at night. He checked the timer. 4 minutes. The team retreated. 20 meters. And then. Boom. A deep, rolling thud. Vibrated through the earth. Followed by. Another. And another. German listening posts. Reported. Heavy armor movement. North of ridge. The illusion. Was no longer. Just sound. Or sight. Or radio. It was physical. A deception. You could feel. Under your boots. And for the German division. That changed everything. At dawn the next morning. Headquarters of the 352nd Division. Was unusually tense. The commander's tent. Buzzed with intercepted signals. Scout reports. And hurried conversations. Between officers. 3 separate patrols. Claimed to have seen. American armor. Signals intelligence. Intercepted what sounded like. A battalion coordinating movement. And artillery spotters. Far to the east. Reported dust clouds. Rising from forest roads. There were no dust clouds. Keller had synced. A dust grenade. With an audio cue. But the spotters. Didn't know that. Fear. Once it appears. Begins to grow. On its own. A lieutenant. Entered the command post. Sir. I believe the Americans. Are preparing a multi-regiment assault. From the northern sector. The commander. Closed his eyes. Thinking. The Allies. Had tricked them before. Calais. Sicily. Countless false landings. He could not. Risk another surprise. Move the 14th Regiment north. He ordered quietly. And shift artillery batteries. To cover the ridge. Just like that. Hundreds of men. Began marching. Artillery units. Relocated positions. Supply trucks. Changed routes. The illusion. Was working. But the 6-man team. Didn't celebrate. Because moving. 1 regiment. Wasn't enough. They needed. The entire division. To shift north. And for that. They had to create. A new fear. A fear. The Germans. Would not ignore. The 6 men. Knew the Germans. Were now watching the ridge. With increasing suspicion. The trick. Had to grow bigger. Bolder. Riskier. Ruiz whispered the plan. And everyone went silent. It was dangerous. It was insane. It was perfect. They would create. The illusion. Of a full nighttime reinforcement convoy. Arriving behind Allied lines. Dozens of trucks. Hundreds of men. All of it fake. Harlow set to work. Building fake truck silhouettes. Canvas stretched over frames. That looked real. In low light. Keller prepared a new audio reel. Truck engines. Gear shifts. Metal rattling. Troops talking quietly. Boots hitting dirt. The rattle of crates. All layered. To sound like. An entire column. Of reinforcements. At 02:13 a.m. The convoy began. Keller's speakers roared to life. Subtle at first. Then louder. Rolling through the valley. Like a living beast. Briggs added. Radio chatter. Convoy Charlie arriving. 2 platoons dismounting. Prepare defensive line. German listening posts. Heard everything. Scouts. Rushed to report movement. Officers. Demanded updates. One commander shouted into a field telephone. How many reinforcements do the Americans have? By dawn, panic spread across the German forward line. The 352nd Division began preparing a major defensive shift. The six-man team had just changed the shape of an entire battlefield. And they were only getting started. By the third day, the 352nd German Infantry Division was no longer calm, no longer confident, no longer certain of the battlefield around them. Reports were piling up on the commander's desk. Contradictory, confusing, yet all pointing to the same terrifying conclusion. The Americans are preparing a major assault. From the north, the commander paced slowly across the floor of his tent, boots thudding against wooden planks. As he read each report again, infantry patrols saw tank silhouettes, artillery observers heard armor, signals intercepts, caught Allied officers coordinating movement. And last night, a convoy of unknown size appeared behind the ridge. Even German intelligence seemed shaken. A signals officer approached with trembling hands. "Sir, we intercepted more chatter this morning. It sounds like they've reinforced the ridge with at least 2 companies. 2 companies was exactly what the Allies wanted them to believe." The commander rubbed his temples. The Americans knew this sector was weak. If they were going to attack, this would be the place. He had to choose: ignore the reports and risk a real attack, or shift major forces north to reinforce the ridge. His decision would shape everything that happened next. And the 6 men were counting on it. Down in the woods, the team watched the horizon through binoculars. O'Malley spotted movement first. Columns heading north. Keller exhaled slowly. It's working. They're redeploying. But Harlow shook his head. That's only a fraction. We need more. And he was right. To create the full illusion, to pull the entire German division north, the team needed one final trick. One bold illusion that the Germans could not afford to ignore. Night fell again. But this night felt different. Colder. Heavier. As if the forest itself knew something dangerous was about to happen. Keller crouched beside a crate of audio reels, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but eyes focused with the sharpness of a surgeon. Because tonight he was going to perform his most delicate illusion yet. Sound deception wasn't just noise. It was psychology. It was rhythm. It was the art of making a battlefield sound alive. He whispered to Briggs. If we pull this off, they'll think the entire 1st Armored Brigade is sitting right under their noses. Briggs nodded and adjusted the transmitter coils. O'Malley and Ruiz set out into the trees to position the speakers in a wide half-circle. Harlow covered them with branches, leaves, and strips of dark fabric, so they would blend into the forest floor. At midnight, Keller began. He started with a low, distant rumble. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to reach German listening posts. It was the sound of treads moving slowly. Then he layered metal clanks, creaking armor, and the thud of heavy boots hitting dirt. One by one, the forest filled with the noise of an army. Briggs added the radio illusion. Bravo Company, hold position. Armored unit arriving. 2 more platoons moving north. The Germans heard everything. In their bunkers. Men froze. Their faces pale. Ears pressed to radios. Because this wasn't the sound of scouts or reconnaissance teams. This was the sound of an attack force assembling. German officers ran between positions, shouting orders. Prepare artillery. Signal headquarters. Get reinforcements north, now. Keller smiled faintly. It's working. They believe it. But Ruiz warned them quietly. The longer we play this game, the more likely they'll send a full patrol to confirm it. And if the Germans discovered the truth, the illusion would collapse instantly. To sell the illusion completely, the 6 men needed one last piece. Something physical. Something real. Something the Germans could not argue with. That was Jonah Pike's job. The saboteur. Pike knelt in the cold dirt, placing small, precise charges deep beneath the soil. Not enough to injure. Not enough to destroy. Just enough to shake. To mimic the tremor of massed armor. He buried them in a staggered pattern along the ridge. Harlow approached quietly. You sure this won't blow us to hell? Pike smirked. No. But it'll shake the Germans right out of their boots. At 03:17 a.m. Pike triggered the first charge. Thump. The ground trembled like a giant foot pressing into the earth. Thump. Thump. German seismic sensors registered the vibrations. Spotters felt the ground shake. Artillery operators reported the tremors. To them, it wasn't sabotage. It was tanks. Dozens of tanks. The combination of Keller's audio, Briggs' radio signals, Harlow's silhouettes, and Pike's timed explosions created a perfect illusion. A multi-layered deception that no German commander could ignore. Within the hour, the Germans sent out another emergency order. Shift additional regiments north. Prepare for possible assault. Down in the shadows, Ruiz whispered. That's it. We've got them. They're moving. But the danger was far from over. Because the more the Germans shifted, the closer they came to discovering the truth. And the 6 men knew their window was shrinking fast. While the 6 men played their deadly illusion in the forest, inside the German command post, chaos swirled. Maps littered the table. Officers pointed, argued, raised their voices. Every report contradicted another. But all of them suggested danger. Intercepts. Movements. Tremors. Shapes in the dark. A communications officer burst in. Sir. Another set of transmissions. Multiple units reporting. Arrival of armored support. The commander pressed both hands onto the table, leaning over the map, as if willing it to give him clarity. This must be a major offensive, he muttered. No one dared disagree. Finally, he issued the order. That changed everything. Pull the remaining regiments from the southern sector. I want full reinforcement of the northern ridge. We hold the Americans there. A murmur swept across the tent. This was huge. They were shifting their entire defensive structure based on fear. Fear created by 6 men. Drums beat. Officers shouted. Columns began marching north. The southern corridor, the one the Allies really needed opened, was now dangerously thin. Exactly as planned. Success can be as dangerous as failure. Because as the illusion grew stronger, the Germans became more desperate to confirm it. The enemy sent a larger patrol. 10 men. Armed. Tired. Suspicious. They moved carefully through the forest toward the ridge. Keller killed the audio. Briggs killed the radio feed. Harlow dropped flat. Pike pressed his back against a tree trunk and held his breath. O'Malley and Ruiz slipped behind a rock shelf. Silent. Unseen. The patrol arrived. At the first tank. The scout leader stepped forward. Hand outstretched. Harlow whispered. Please, don't touch it. If a German soldier placed a hand on the canvas frame, the illusion would die instantly. But the scout didn't touch it. He only looked from a distance through the dim dark. Fear kept him back. He whispered to the others. 2, maybe 3 Shermans. Engines cold. Probably moved here after midnight. He was describing a decoy, but believing a tank. The patrol withdrew. Slowly. Quietly. Convinced. Only when the Germans were gone did the 6 men breathe again. But they knew something now. Their illusion was almost perfect. But the Germans were getting closer. Too close. They had to prepare for the final phase. The 6 men gathered beneath a cluster of dead pines. Cold air hovered in their lungs. Their bodies ached from exhaustion. Their nerves screamed for rest. But the mission was not over. Not yet. They needed one last illusion. One final push. To force the Germans to fully abandon the southern sector. Briggs laid out the plan. In a low whisper. A fake offensive. A full-scale simulation of an imminent assault. Radio chatter from multiple units. Artillery positions. Armor ready to advance. Troops awaiting orders. Keller added. The sound dimension. Artillery rolling. Troops gathering. The metallic thunder of tanks revving for attack. Harlow prepared. The final silhouettes. Artillery outlines. And vehicle shadows. Placed farther apart. To look like a growing force. Pike set. His last set of charges. And Ruiz planted false maps, where German scouts were guaranteed to find them. When everything was ready, Briggs took a breath. Let's give them the battle they're afraid of. The valley erupted. Radios crackling. All units, prepare. Stand by for advance. Artillery ready. Engines roaring. Tracks grinding. Men shouting. Explosions rolling. Across the earth. The forest became a battlefield. Even though not a single Allied soldier was truly there. German scouts fled. Commanders panicked. Officers screamed orders. Within the hour, the commander ordered it. Shift the entire division north. All units. Move. 12,000 German soldiers marched away from the real target, leaving the corridor unguarded. And the 6 men stood in the shadows, watching an entire army run from a ghost, while 12,000 German soldiers marched north in a panic. An Allied armored column waited quietly behind a line of trees. Far to the south, engines cold, turrets still, men whispering, as if afraid to disturb the air. They had been waiting for one signal, one confirmation, that the deception had succeeded. A runner arrived at the lead tank. Scouts report. The southern sector is open. German forces have shifted north. The corridor is clear. The commander exhaled slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply raised his hand and gave the order. Advance. Engines roared to life. Treads bit into the dirt. The forest shook. As real armor, not decoys, not illusions, began moving forward. American tank commanders peered through periscopes, expecting resistance. But there was none. No machine gun fire. No artillery. No scouts. German trenches were abandoned. Rifles still leaning against sandbags. Spent cigarettes still smoldering in metal trays. It looked like an army that had fled in the middle of a breath. And that's exactly what had happened. For the next 2 miles, the Allies advanced through empty defenses, bunkers without soldiers, artillery pits, where guns stood watch over nothing. Every minute gained here meant fewer Allied casualties, fewer men lost, fewer families who would receive a telegram of heartbreak. All because 6 men had convinced an enemy division to chase ghosts in the dark. Up on the ridge, the 6-man deception team watched the southern horizon. Harlow whispered, "They're moving. The Allies are moving." Keller's eyes watered. From exhaustion. From relief. From the realization that their impossible mission had actually worked. Ruiz smiled faintly. "We opened the door," he said softly. "Now they're walking through it." But the mission was not over yet. Because the Germans would eventually discover the truth. And when they did, the 6 men still had to escape. By sunrise, the German division had fully repositioned. Thousands of men dug into new positions across the northern ridge. But something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Scouts reported. No visual contact. Artillery observers reported no movement. Signals intercepts grew strangely quiet. The illusion was now fading. And illusions never fade. Quietly. A German patrol, larger this time, was ordered to investigate the ridge. 20 men. Veterans. Suspicious. Determined. They advanced slowly toward the decoy zone. The 6 men were already gone, moving deeper into the forest. But their decoys remained. The patrol reached the first tank. A soldier stepped forward. Jaw clenched. Face tight with worry. He extended his hand. And pressed it against the side. Canvas. Cold. Soft. He recoiled. "It's fake," he whispered. Another soldier kicked the frame. And the whole silhouette shuddered. This time there was no mistaking it. Within minutes the patrol discovered the buried speakers, the fake tracks, the forged documents, the radio wires disguised beneath leaves. The truth hit them all at once. "We've been tricked," the scout leader cursed under his breath. He understood the consequences. If the Americans were not here, they could be anywhere. He sprinted back toward division headquarters as fast as his legs could take him. Heart pounding, lungs burning, desperate to warn his commanders. But it was already too late. The Allies were pushing through the southern corridor. And no order. No radio message. No shift in regiments would stop them now. The illusion had bought exactly the time needed. But discovery meant only one thing. The Germans were coming back. And the 6 men were still in the forest. The forest was no longer safe. German units were flooding south again. Boots pounding the dirt. Voices echoing between the trees. The 6 men moved fast, but silently. Every twig felt like a gunshot. Every crunch of leaves felt like a flare. Pike led the group, skilled at moving through dangerous ground. Without being seen, he raised a fist. They froze. In the distance, voices. German soldiers. Close. Too close. The 6 men pressed flat against the forest floor. Faces in the dirt. Breath held in tight, painful bursts. A German patrol passed within 15 meters. Harlow counted boots. 6. Maybe 7 men. The patrol paused. One soldier turned, facing their hiding spot. A long, silent moment. Then a shout from deeper in the woods. The patrol moved toward the sound. And disappeared. The 6 men rose slowly, carefully, and continued their retreat. But trouble was closing in. German divisions were shifting south, searching for saboteurs. Desperation turning into suspicion. Briggs whispered. "They know we fooled them. They know someone was here. Pike nodded grimly. And they're hunting. They moved. Toward the extraction point. A ravine. That cut through the forest. Like a scar. If they reached it. Allied scouts. Would guide them. To safety. If not. Ruiz said quietly. Let's keep moving. We're not dying. In these trees. So they ran. Exhausted. Cold. Driven by the knowledge. That the entire German division. Was now searching for them. 6 men. Outnumbered. 2,000 to 1. Running through shadows. They had created. The ravine. Was only a mile away. 1 mile. Between life and death. But the Germans. Were closing in. From both sides. Shouts echoed. Through the trees. Dogs barked. A flare lit the sky. Casting long, cruel shadows. Across the forest floor. Down. Pike hissed. The 6 dropped. Behind a fallen log. As a search party. Swept through the woods. Flashlights. Rifles. Sharp voices. One soldier. Approached the log. Step by step. Boot crushing dead leaves. He stopped. Just inches away. The 6 men. Could hear his breathing. They waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 20. Then another flare. Ignited behind him. And he turned. To investigate the noise. The moment he left. Pike whispered sharply. Move. Now. They sprinted. Through the undergrowth. Branches ripping at their coats. Boots skidding on wet earth. The ravine. Appeared ahead. Like a dark wound. In the landscape. They climbed down. Its steep edge. Slipping. Sliding. Catching roots. To keep from falling. At the bottom. Nothing. Just silence. Then. A rustle. A voice. You're late. Someone whispered. From the shadows. Allied scouts. Stepped forward. You boys. Stirred up a hornet's nest. The team exhaled. As one. They had made it. But the mission. Was not finished yet. Because somewhere above them. The Germans. Were gathering again. And the forest. Was filling. With the sound. Of distant artillery. Moving south. The scouts led them. Through the ravine. A twisting passage. Of stone and shadow. Shielded from German patrols. But the enemy. Was everywhere. Flashlights. Cut across the night. Like knives. Dogs barked. From the ridge overhead. A single misstep. Would reveal them. They moved silently. Carefully. Feet sinking. Into soft mud. Briggs clutched. The radio transmitter. To his chest. Keller carried. The last audio reels. Harlow and Ruiz. Supported Pike. Who had twisted his ankle. During the descent. They pushed forward. Inch by inch. Then. A German flare. Burst overhead. The ravine. Lit up. Like daylight. Shouts erupted. From the ridge. They've seen us. O'Malley whispered. The scouts raised rifles. But Pike shook his head. No gunfire. It'll bring the whole division. They had one option. Run. They sprinted. Through the ravine. As gunshots cracked. Across the night. Stone splintered. Mud kicked upward. Voices roared. From above. The scouts led them. To a narrow path. That wound up the ravine wall. At the top. A clearing. An Allied jeep. Waited in the dark. Its engine cold. Get in. The driver shouted. One by one. They dove into the back. Pike climbed last. Grimacing in pain. The jeep roared forward. As German bullets. Ricocheted off stones. Behind them. But the forest. Began to thin. And the sound of gunfire. Faded behind. A curtain of trees. They had escaped. 6 ghosts. Vanishing into the night. Leaving behind. One of the largest. Military illusions. Of the entire war. By dawn. The German division. Finally realized. The truth. There was no Allied assault. No battalion. No tanks. No convoys. Just illusions. Just shadows. But by then. It didn't matter. The Allies. Had already advanced. Through the weakened corridor. Tanks rolled. Infantry surged. Artillery established. New firing lines. An entire front. Shifted. Because of 6 men. In war. Victory is often measured. In bodies. In bullets. In miles gained. But this victory. Was measured. In imagination. A handful of inflatable tanks. A few reels of sound. One small transmitter. False tracks. In the dirt. Boot prints. That led nowhere. 6 men. Against 12,000. And they won. Not with force. Not with firepower. But with understanding. That fear. Shapes decisions. More powerfully. Than any weapon. Their operation. Remained classified. For decades. Their names. Were buried. In secret files. But now. Their story is finally told. A story. Of ingenuity. Courage. And deception. So perfect. That it changed. The shape. Of a battlefield. This is the legacy. Of the 6 men. Who fooled. An entire German division. A legacy of shadows. And brilliance. A reminder. That in the darkest hours. Of war. Even imagination. Can become. A weapon.